Osho's stories, a woman who made love to every man. Sex is only the alphabet of love, bricks out of which you can make a Taj Mahal. But Taj Mahal is not just bricks, states Osho. The story is really beautiful, a very small story, nothing much in it, and yet tremendous is its content. A woman who made love to every man who came to her for sex, but her cheek was always wet from tears. Just a once sentence story, but the story can be the story of the whole humanity. This is what is happening. Love is possible, but it never rises above sex. Hence, all the cheeks are full of tears, wet. I can see your cheeks full of tears, tears rolling down. One of the greatest miseries in human life is that one remains with sexuality and never moves beyond it and never achieves a moment of love. Sex is only the alphabet of love, bricks out of which you can make a Taj Mahal, but Taj Mahal is not just bricks. You can pile up bricks, it will not become a Taj Mahal. Taj Mahal is a composition of infinite love, of infinite creativity. Bricks are only the visible part of it. Taj Mahal is something invisible. Bricks have made that invisible visible in a certain way, and you can feel it. Bricks help the invisible to be felt, but the bricks are not the invisible. Sex is just like bricks, and if you go on piling sex, one is bound to feel in tears. The woman must have been a woman of deep understanding. People look at each other, but they don't look at each other at all. They are just looking for the sex object. A woman passes. Have you ever seen a woman as a being? Sometimes you become interested in a woman, but not as a being. You feel a certain attraction, but not as a being, but as a sex object. Or sometimes you are repelled, that too is sexual. Or sometimes you are not interested, bored, neither repelled nor attracted, just indifferent, but that too is sexual. And unless you can come across a person who can look at you in your eyes as a being, not just as a sexual object, who can love you as a being, then you have found your friend, not before it. We go on looking for only that which we have a desire for. Man looking at a woman, woman looking at a man are not looking at each other, they are looking for something. They are looking for their own food. They have an appetite, a hunger. That hunger is sexual. Hence, whenever somebody looks at you as a sex object, you feel offended because he is reducing your identity to a very muddy state. He is reducing you to the lowest denominator, to the lowest rung of your being. A person can love you without reducing you. In fact, love never reduces you. Love helps you to rise above the ordinariness. Love helps you to soar high. It makes you meditative, ecstatic. Love becomes the first proof that God exists, that life is not just matter, and man is not just body, that soul exists, that there is the world of the beyond. The woman must have been missing it. She may have loved many people, but whenever she looked into their souls, there was nothing but a desire for sex. Maulinga Putta's questions. First, you have to become a receiver. First, you have to attain to silence. Then, communion is possible, not before it. Buddha is not an atheist, but he never talks about God. That's why I say he is a rarity. He brings many people to God. He brought more people than anybody else has done. Millions of people were brought to become godly in his presence, but he never uttered a word. Not only God, but even soul, self. He has no theory about it. He simply says, I can show you the way how to go in. You go and see. He says Buddhas can only indicate the path. They cannot provide you with a philosophy. You are there. Go in and see. One man came to Buddha. He was a great scholar, a sort of professor, had written many books, was known all over the country. Molingaputta was his name. He said to Buddha, I have come with dozen questions and you have to answer them. Buddha said, I will answer, but you will have to fulfill a requirement. For 1 year, you will have to be with me in total silence. Then I will answer, not before it. Right now, I can answer, but you will not receive the answers because you are not ready. And whatsoever I say, you will misinterpret because you have too many interpretations crowding your mind. Whatsoever I say will have to pass through your mind. For 1 year, you just be silent so that you can drop the knowledge when you are empty. Whatsoever you want to ask, I will answer, I promise you. While he was saying this, another of Buddha's disciples, Sariputta, sitting under a tree, started laughing a mad laughter. Molingaputta must have felt embarrassed. He said, What is the matter? Why are you laughing? He said, I am not laughing about you, I am laughing about myself. 1 year has passed, this man deceived me also. I had come with many questions, and he said, Wait for 1 year, and I waited. Now I am laughing because now those questions have disappeared. He goes on asking, Now bring those questions, but I cannot bring those questions. They have disappeared. So, Malingaputta, if you really want your questions to be answered, ask now. Don't wait for 1 year. This man is deceptive. Buddha introduced many people, millions of people, to the inner world, but in a very rational way. This is simple that first you have to become a receiver, first you have to attain to silence, then communion is possible, not before it. Buddha never used to answer any metaphysical questions. He was always ready to answer any question about methods, but he was never ready to answer any question about metaphysics. This is his scientific approach. Science believes in method. Science never answers the why, it always answers the how. The mouse and the elephant. The original mind is egoless. It doesn't know the I because I is a shirking. The original mind is infinite, like the sky. All minds are artificially created minds. Artificially created minds proceed from egoism alone. I am a Hindu, I am a Mohammedan, I am black, I am white, I am this, that. They are all artificial minds. The original face, the original mind, uncreated by man, has to be known and realized. I have heard. The elephant looked down and saw a little, very tiny mouse standing by its food. Dear me, said the elephant, you are very tiny. Yes, agreed the mouse. I have not been very well lately. Even a mouse has his own ego. He has been ill. That is why the artificial mind lives through ego. So, if you start dropping your ego, the artificial mind will start disintegrating. Or, if you drop your artificial mind, the ego will start disintegrating. And if you really want to get rid of this rock, start both ways together. Never enhance the ego in any way. The way are very subtle. Remember that the original mind is egoless. It doesn't know the I because I is a shirking. The original mind is infinite like the sky. The shadow pointing to a buried treasure. All paths can lead to it because, in a way, it is already achieved. It is within you. You are not seeking something new, you are seeking something which you have forgotten. Pure consciousness can be achieved through many paths. The real thing is not a path, the real thing is the authenticity of the seeker. Let me emphasize this. You can travel on any path. If you are sincere and authentic, you will reach to the goal. Some paths may be hard, some may be easier, some may have greenery on both sides, some may be moving through deserts, some may have beautiful scenery around them, some may not have any scenery around them. That's another thing. But if you are sincere and honest and authentic and true, then each path leads to the goal. Krishna has said in Srimad Bhagavad Gita, whatever path men travel is my path. No matter where they walk, it leads to me. So it simply can be reduced to one thing, that authenticity is the path. No matter what path you follow, if you are authentic, even path leads to him, and the opposite is also true. No matter what path you follow, if you are not authentic, you will not reach anywhere. Your authenticity brings you back home, nothing else. All paths are just secondary. The basic thing is to be authentic, to be true. There is a Sufi story. A man heard that if he went to a certain place in the desert at dawn and stood facing a distant mountain, his shadow would point to a great buried treasure. The man left his cabin before the first light of the day and at dawn was standing in the designated place. His shadow shot out long and thin over the surface of the sea sand. How fortunate, he thought as he envisioned himself with great wealth. He began digging for the treasure. He was so involved with his work that he did not notice the sun climbing in the sky and shortening his shadow. And then he noticed it. It was now almost half of the previous size. He became worried and started digging again in the new spot. However, later at noon, the man again stood in the designated spot. He cast no shadow. He became very much worried. He started crying and weeping, the whole effort lost. Now, where is the place? Then there passed a Sufi master who started laughing at him and said, now exactly the shadow is pointing to the treasure. It is within you. All paths can lead to it because, in a way, it is already achieved. It is within you. You are not seeking something new. You are seeking something which you have forgotten. And how can you really forget it? That is why we go on searching for bliss, because we cannot forget it. It goes on resounding inside us. The search for bliss, the search for joy, the search for happiness is nothing but the search for God. You may not have used the word God, that doesn't matter, but all searching for bliss is the search for God. It is the search for something that you knew that one day was yours and you lost. That is why all the great saints have said, remember, Buddha calls it Samyak Smriti, right remembrance. Nanak calls it Nam Simran, remembering the name, remembering the address. Have you not observed many times it happens? You know something, you say, it is exactly on the tip of my tongue, but still it is not coming. God is at the tip of your tongue. In a small school, the chemistry teacher wrote a formula on the blackboard and he asked a small boy to stand up and tell him what this formula represents. The boy looked and he said, "Sir, it is just on the tip of my tongue, but I cannot remember." The teacher said, "Spit it out, spit it out. It is potassium cyanide." God is also on the tip of the tongue, and I will tell you, swallow it, don't spit it out. It is God. Let Him circulate in your blood. Let Him become part of your innermost vibrations. Let Him become a song inside your being, a dance. Socrates' inquiry into death. From the very moment of conception, the search starts. Until death, the search continues. Kakoun painted 10 pictures of the whole search of man. And man is the search. He is not only an inquirer, he is inquiry. From the very moment of conception, the search starts. If you ask scientists, they will say that when a man and woman meet, the man releases millions of cells, and those cells start running somewhere towards the female egg. They don't know where it is, but they run fast. The search has started. They are very tiny cells, but they are seeking an egg. One of them will reach, others will perish on the way. One of them will reach the egg, will be born into the world. From that moment, the search has started, the inquiry has started. Until death, the search continues. Socrates was dying. His disciples started crying and weeping. It was natural. But he said to them, "Stop, don't disturb me. Let me inquire into that. Don't distract me. You can cry later on. I will be gone soon. Right now, let me inquire what death is. I have been waiting my whole life for this moment to go into the reality of death." He was poisoned. He was lying on his bed watching what death is, inquiring what death is. And then he said to his disciples, "My feet are getting numb, but I am still as much as I was before. Nothing has been taken away from me. My feeling of my being is as total as before. My feet are gone." Then he said, "My legs are gone, but I am still the same. I cannot see myself reduced to anything less. I remain the total." Then he said, "My stomach is feeling numb. My hands are feeling numb." But he was very excited, ecstatic. He said, "But I still say to you, I am the same. Nothing has been taken away from me." And then he started smiling and he said, "This shows that sooner or later death will take my heart also, but it cannot take me." Then he said, "My hands are gone. Now even my heart is sinking, and these will be my last words because my tongue is becoming numb. But I tell you, remember these my last words. I am still the same, total." This is the inquiry into death. But from the very conception to the very end, man is an inquiry into the search for truth. And if you are not searching for truth, you are not a man, then you have missed. Then at the most, you look like a man, but you are not man. Your humanity is only in appearance, but not in your heart. And don't be deceived by appearances. When you look in the mirror, you can see that you are a man. That proves nothing unless your inquiry grows to such heights that your whole energy is transformed into inquiry and you become a quest. You are not man. That is the difference between other animals and man. They live, they don't inquire. They simply live, they don't inquire. No animal has ever asked, what is truth? What is life? What is the meaning of life? Why are we here? From where do we come? To what goal are we destined? No tree, no bird, no animal. This big earth has not asked this. This tremendously vast sky has never inquired about this. This is the glory of man. He is very small but bigger than the sky because something in him is unique, the inquiry. Even the vast sky is not so vast as man because there may be an end to the sky, but there is no end to man's inquiry. It is an eternal pilgrimage, beginningless, endless. These 10 bulls are a pictorial representation of the inquiry that I call man. Plato dismisses an inquiring student. Never ask what you are for. You are for yourself, and unless you realize this, you will miss much. Deep down, your innermost being is always waiting for someone who will love you for yourself, for nothing else, just for yourself. Somebody who will say, I love you for love's sake. I love you the way you are. I love you because you are. I love you, your being, and there is no end to it, no purpose behind it. Unless somebody comes and loves you meaninglessly, you will not have the glory of life. Remember, in that meaninglessness is hidden the whole significance of life. When somebody loves you meaningfully, he has already reduced you to an object. You are a thing and he is a purchaser. When somebody loves you just for you, for no other reason at all, then suddenly your inner flower blooms. You are accepted as you are. Love always accepts you as you are, and through that acceptance, much transformation happens. You can bloom. Now there is no fear. Now nothing is accepted from you. You can relax. Now there is no goal beyond you. You are the goal. You can dance and celebrate. It happened. In the 4th century BC, the great Athenian philosopher Plato established a school, the academy, at which mathematics was a key portion of the curriculum. Plato loved mathematics tremendously. He was a poet of mathematics, a lover. On his academy door, it was written, if you don't know mathematics, please don't enter. One had to learn mathematics before one could enter the academy. It was taught with the utmost rigor of which the times were capable, and it dealt with idealized shapes on which idealized operations were performed. One student who was put to stern mental exercises over the Platonic conception of mathematics kept searching in vain for some application to the various forms of artisanry for which he knew mathematical concepts were useful. Finally, he said to Plato, but, master, to what particular use can these theorems he put? I don't see any practical use. The theorems are beautiful, they are pure mathematics, but what is the utility? To what use can these theorems be put? What can be gained from them? The old philosopher glared at the inquiring student, turned to a slave and said, give this young man a penny, that he might feel he has gained something from my teachings, and then expel him. It is difficult to understand because for Plato, mathematics was his love, his beloved. Profit was not the question, achieving anything was not the question. Just to contemplate those forms, those pure forms of mathematics was enough. That very contemplation leads one into the unknown. It is not a question of any gain. Life itself is enough unto itself, and if you are trying to fulfill some goal, you will miss life. That's what has been taught to you from the very beginning. Every parent is trying to force you into some utility. They are worried that you may become a vagabond, you may become a wanderer. They are worried that you may become useless. They are worried that you may not prove yourself of any use in the world. Then, who will appreciate you? Their egos are worried because through you they are planning some fulfillment of their own unfulfilled egos. Their parents did the same with them. Now they are doing the same with you, and you will go on doing the same with your children. Dead people go on haunting you. Your father may be dead, but he will go on haunting you. Whatever you relax, you will hear the voice of your father. What you are doing, getting lazy, do something, and you will jump out of your laziness and run around and do something because you are getting useless. Because everybody has been conditioned to be some utility, the question arises for what? And if you cannot find the answer, you feel very puzzled and confused. Drop all that nonsense. You are enough as you are. I am not saying become lazy. I am not saying become a parasite. I am saying to live your life as an intrinsic value. Do whatsoever you want to do, but don't do it to prove that you are useful. Do it because you love it. Do it because you feel happy doing it. Do it because it is your love. And suddenly everything has a different color and everything becomes luminous. Ice Ice presents to a poor samurai. Compassion knows no rules. Compassion is beyond rules. It is wild. It follows no formalities. Now, the Zen story. One winter day, a masterless samurai came to Ice Ice's temple and made an appeal. I am poor and sick, he said, and my family is dying of hunger. Please help us, master. Dependent as he was on widow's mites, Ice Ice's life was very austere and he had nothing to give. He was about to send the samurai off when he remembered the image of Yakushi Buddha in the hall. Going up to it, he tore off its halo and gave it to the samurai. Sell this, said Isai. It should tide you over. The bewildered but desperate samurai took the halo and left. Master, cried one of Isai's disciples, that's sacrilege. How could you do such a thing? Sacrilege, bah! I have merely put the Buddha's mind, which is full of love and mercy, to use us to speak. Indeed, if he himself had heard that poor samurai, he would have cut off a limb for him. A very simple story, but very significant. First, even when you have nothing to give, look again. You will always find something to give. Even when you have nothing to give, you can always find something to give. It is a question of attitude. If you cannot give anything, at least you can smile. If you cannot give anything, at least you can sit with the person and hold his hand. It is not a question of giving something, it is a question of giving. This Aisai was a poor monk, as Buddhist monks are. His life was very austere and he had nothing to give. Ordinarily, it is an absolute sacrilege to take the halo off Buddha's statue and give it away. No so called religious person could think of it, only somebody who is really religious would. That is why I say compassion knows no rules. Compassion is beyond rules. It is wild. It follows no formalities. A motor scooter and three rabbits. Somewhere a deep balance is needed. Just between the two, exactly between the two, is transcendence. Things go on moving from one extreme to another. You hope, then by and by, the pendulum moves towards hopelessness. If you are too much in love with life, by and by you move towards suicide. If you are too religious, by and by you move and become anti religious. The pendulum goes on moving towards the opposite. Somewhere in the middle, one has to stop. And if you stop in the middle, time stops with you. And when the time stops, all hope, all desires have stopped. You start living now. Now is the only time, and here is the only space. Let me tell you one story. It is a very beautiful Jewish anecdote. Young Sammy Moscovich had just bought himself a motor scooter, but he had been brought up in Orthodox fashion and was not the least bit sure whether it was fitting for an Orthodox Jew to ride one. He thought that the best way out would be to get his reverend rabbi to teach him a barucha, a traditional prayer of blessing, to intone over the motor scooter before he drove it. Surely that would make it proper for him to use it. He therefore approached his rabbi and said, Rabbi, I have brought a motor scooter and I wish to know if you could teach me a barucha to say over it each morning. The rabbi said, What is a motor scooter? Sammy explained, and the rabbi shook his head. As far as I know, there is no appropriate barucha for the occasion, and I strongly suspect that riding a motor scooter is a sin. I forbid you to use it. Sammy was very downhearted, for from his very soul he longed to drive his motor scooter, which had set him back a considerable sum. A thought occurred to him, why not seek a second and perhaps more liberal opinion from a rabbi who was not orthodox but merely conservative? He found a conservative rabbi who, unlike the orthodox rabbi earlier consulted, was not in the traditional long coat at all but wore a dark business suit. The conservative rabbi said, What is a motor scooter? Sammy explained. The rabbi thought for a while, then said, I suppose there is nothing wrong about riding a motor scooter, but still I don't know of any appropriate barucha, and if your conscience hurts you without one, then don't drive it. He journeyed out to the suburbs and met Rabbi Richmond Ills in his knickerbockers, about to leave for the golf links on his motor scooter. Sammy grew terribly excited. It's all right for a Jew to ride a motor scooter, he said. I have got one, but I didn't know. Sure, kid, said the rabbi. Nothing wrong with the motor scooter at all. Ride it in good health. Then give me a barucha for it. The reformed rabbi thought, then said, What's a barucha? The orthodox doesn't know what a motor scooter is, and the progressive is not aware of what a barucha is. From religion, too much dogmatic religion, people become too irreligious. When they leave the church, they move to the prostitute. Some where a deep balance is needed just between the two, exactly between the two, is transcendence. Buddha used to say, My path is the middle path. This is the path of transcendence. Jesus hiding in the marble block. The seeker is the sought. Just a few unnecessary things are crowding you. The search is negative. Drop them and you discover yourself in all your glory. The search is not going to help you to reach the goal because the goal has never been lost. The search is only going to help to drop greed, fear, possessiveness, jealousy, hatred, anger. The search is only going to help you drop the hindrances, and once the hindrances are not there, suddenly one becomes aware. I have always been here, I have never gone anywhere else, so the whole search is negative in a way. It is just like when somebody makes a statue out of a marble block. What does he do? He simply chips unessential parts away, and by the image appears. Somebody asked, Michelangelo, he was making a statue of Jesus. Somebody said, your creation is great. He said, I have not done anything. Jesus was hiding inside this marble block and I just helped him to be released. He was already there. Just more marble was there than was needed. The unessential was there. I have cut away the unessential. I have simply discovered him. I have not created him. In fact, the marble block had been discarded by the builders. Walking around the church which was going to be built, Michelangelo asked the builders, why has this marble block been thrown away? They said it is useless, so he took it away, and one of the most beautiful images of Jesus came out of it. Michelangelo used to say, when I was walking by the side of this block, Jesus called me. Hidden inside the block, he said, Michelangelo, come and release me. I have done only negative work. The seeker is the sought. Just a few unnecessary things are crowding you. The search is negative. Drop them and you discover yourself in all your glory.